when you apply for the exam, it's gonna take some time, okay, because they're backlogged up there at the, California Department of Real Estate. So it's gonna take you maybe a month, to get your exam, date. Once you get the exam date, then you gotta study for the exam, and you gotta probably spend at least 2 or 3 weeks, maybe a month to study for the exam. And then you put in the exam date, okay, that you're gonna go take it, and then you go take it, and then they say, oh, congratulations, you passed the exam, give us $360, and we'll send you the license in whenever, and that usually takes like another month, okay? So it takes like 4 months to get it now, which really sucks, okay? And then the agent's license, you gotta read the criteria. I'll go to the Department of Real Estate in a second. Once you get an agency license, you have to be underneath the broker, okay? And there are certain requirements that you need experience and additional courses to basically sit for the broker's license. The goal is to get the broker's license, because once you're a broker, you're a principal, okay? If you're an agent, you have to work for a broker. If you're a broker, you can work for a broker, you can work for yourself, you can create other corporate brokerages to run your other asset management, mortgage, whatever, property management under your broker's license. But once you're a broker, you're a principal and everybody has to talk to you, okay? So the goal is to get the broker's license, okay, as soon as possible, but you can't get it until you get your agent's license. Okay. Before, what I did was I just got my 4-year degree, took the 5 courses, qualified for the broker's license, and then studied my butt off and then sat for the broker's license. It's an 8-hour exam, 2 parts with an hour lunch, where the agency license is 4 hours, okay? So the goal is to get the real estate license as soon as possible, okay? So that's Dwayne Doler. He'll help you, and if you tell him that you're one of my students, he'll give you a 10% discount on the prep course. And it's the courses and the test prep, okay? So it's a 2-for-1. It's like $360, I think, for this piece, and then your license is gonna be like $350. So you're basically looking at about $700, to get it, all right? But I get it as soon as possible, okay? And then the next place is you wanna go to the California Department of Real Estate. Used to be called the Bureau of Real Estate, but they changed it back. So the California Department of Real Estate is the licensing agency. So all, like being an accountant, certified public accountant, lawyer, a real estate broker, insurance broker, you are licensed by the state, okay, not at the federal level. So if you go up to licensees and examinees, that's where you're gonna get the information to be able to sit for the exam, okay? And then I think it's like 2 years or 3 years, you gotta take continuing education, not only for this, but for your insurance license and all this other, so there's usually continuing education requirements around it, and if you don't get the continuing ed, then you're suspended, okay? Your license is suspended. And you can actually even look up, like here I can verify a license. What's my name? Lawrence Anthony Souza. You can look up an agent, to see if they're, what's going on? Okay. That's me. I don't know what's coming up, but you can check to see if the person's, if there's been any violations, if it's been suspended, revoked, if the agent has had any lawsuits or anything like that pulled against them. So very quickly you could look people up. And I did that when somebody was buying our apartment building. I thought that the broker was a little shady. So what I did was I did a background check on him and basically went through his criminal record and found out he got thrown in jail about 20, maybe 30 years ago in the 80s for running cocaine across the Mexico border and got caught. Huh?
So you didn't do the deal?
Huh? He ended up doing the deal, but I thought it was kind of interesting. I knew he was a little shady. You can just tell.
This looks like a guy.
You can just tell. The other is the California or National Association of Realtors. Okay, you want to put that in realtors, or it's also called NAR. Now, NAR is probably the most powerful lobbying organization in Washington, D.C., next to AARP, which is the Association of, retired people. Each industry group has lobbying groups that lobby Congress, for legislation, in favor of their industry in most cases. So NAR is probably the most powerful, I think it is the most powerful next to AARP, which is retired people, lobbying organization in the United States, just to show how big real estate is as an industry. And they have all kinds of really good research and statistics and reports. Lawrence Yun, who I actually know personally, is the chief economist there, produces some great stuff. So if you want to focus on housing and you want some housing statistics, I would look up here into the research reports and the housing statistics. Okay. The second one that's really big is the California Association of Realtors. Or CAR is the CAR is the acronym. And this is a huge, organization, of, when you're a broker and an agent, you have to you have to join the National Association of Realtors, you gotta join the California Association of Realtors, and you gotta join a local board, okay? And that cost me, I don't know, like $900 a year to just be part of that, all three of those organizations. But to be a part of those organizations, it gives you access to California, the legislature, their lobbying group, and all their research and statistics, and then all of the agents. Okay. So being able to have access to agents, a pool of agents, is extremely important. Okay. All right. And they have all kinds of really good research. And then Leslie Appleton Young is the CAR economist. She's amazing. She produces all kinds of research. She does at least, 2 or 3, presentations to local boards and legislatures and real estate organizations and brokerage firms, every day. She's amazing. She went to Berkeley, got her PhD at Haas in finance, through the finance department with a concentration in real estate, PhD, which Cal and Wharton are probably 2 of the top real estate programs, PhD programs in the country, along with USC, Georgetown, Chicago, not really, definitely USC, Texas A&M, University of Austin is really good, San Diego, University of San Diego has a really good program, NYU, Columbia, 2 top real estate programs, not only real estate research, but also in development. And you can do MBA, JD, PhD, JD, PhD, those top tier schools will allow you to combine, degrees. You do any of those combinations, you're set for life. You'll never be unemployed. The next one is I belong to the San Francisco. Board of Realtors. SFAR. This is a really good organization too. They have an East Bay board, they have a Silicon Valley, a Peninsula board. They do provide some research too through their website. They actually tried to create their own research and I pitched them to see if I could go work for them. But they hired one of my competition instead. But they ended up hooking up with Paragon in San Francisco, which is really great. Brokerage organization on the residential side, and they produced phenomenal research. So if anybody's interested in, housing trends and statistics in San Francisco, you want to go to Paragon. Those are the guys you want to use. Compass is pretty good too, but I would do Paragon. That's just from my experience. The other is the RICS, the RICS. And I talked about some of these at the end of that presentation that I made last week. I'm just going through some of the the application piece is where to go get the data, and, you know, what are the websites that we look at. Now, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, which I'm a fellow of, is the oldest evaluation organization, you know, in the world. They were basically established by the King and Queen of England, because they basically owned everything in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, South Africa, you know, all over the world based on the empire. And what they did is they had all these property portfolios, and people would rent the land for agricultural purposes, would build buildings, you know, on the commercial and agricultural buildings. And then they would send around these surveyors to basically assess all of the property values and how much money was being generated from those properties and those improvements. And they would assess they would then assess the taxes, and they would collect the taxes from the people who were using the properties. So they're experts in valuation and construction costs and stuff. So it's a very prestigious organization on a global basis. I feel very honored to be a part of that organization, because I can basically pick up the phone or go to the website and look at the directory. If somebody asks me what's, you know, the office market like, or what's housing like in South Africa, in Johannesburg, if I got some kind of contract like that, I could go to the RICS, look up who the members were in Johannesburg, and basically reach out to them, and they would answer me instantly, and I would have a pool of experts, you know, in that property sector, in that geographic location. And where are you from?
Me?
Yeah.
Australia.
Australia, I could do the same thing if it was Sydney or Brisbane, or, you know, any of those. The same thing with New Zealand. So it's a great organization. The next one down, which I believe is also one of the most prestigious organizations, is the Counselors of Real Estate. Which we're also called CREs, Counselors of Real Estate. This is another very prestigious organization. People who belong to the Counselors of Real Estate have to have at least 10 years of experience, and they have to show that they have managed some type of division or function or company. Either you own your own appraisal, valuation consulting firm, your own brokerage firm, mortgage, you ran research departments or acquisition divisions. You gotta be, you know, kind of a principal. You have to have at least 10 years of experience, and then you're reviewed. You have to pull together, you know, this is what I did, you know, a box or boxes and boxes of materials that you've done based off of your 10 years of experience. And then people like me will sit down and interview you and go through all your stuff. And if they're up to a quality level, then I will write an extensive letter of recommendation that will then get you, you know, potentially with others appointed to become a counselor. It's really expensive to be one. It costs like a couple $1,000 a year, but it's very prestigious. And when people see CRE or RICS, you know, after your name, they know you're an expert in real estate. Okay, and there's a lot of academics that are RICS and CREs too. Okay, the other, which I'm going, I think, down, is the Appraisal Institute. And the RICS is actually located and headquartered in London. The CREs are located in Chicago, with the regional office for the National Association of Realtors. The Appraisal Institute is the premier along with the RICS. This is a domestic organization. If you want to be a valuation expert, you have to do valuations. Usually these valuation experts that are part of the CREs, RICS, Appraisal Institute, you got to go through examinations and, you know, maybe credentialing. These you actually have to take courses, and then you have to take exams, and then comprehensive exams, and then show a portfolio of work, so it's pretty hardcore. Most people who do this also do their general appraiser's license through this California State Appraisers, Department of Appraisal. Once you get your general's license and you get what is called an MAI through the Appraisal Institute, you're an expert. You don't work for a bank or a developer. A lot of these people who get these credentials and become valuation experts go on and do their own development they do consulting, maybe they run their own brokerage firms. I mean, they're like, they totally understand the valuation process around real estate, and they can spot value for development purposes, consulting, and really large, complex consulting contracts. That's on my list of things to do. I'm really close, but I had to put it off for some other stuff. The next one is the CCIM, Certified Commercial Investment Member. CCIM Institute. This organization is really good. If anybody wants to do like short courses on valuation, or Argus, which is the software application that everybody uses for acquisition and development purposes. This is really good. This took me about 3 years to get. You gotta go take, well now you can do it all online, but when I did it, you had to take like a week off. You know, the teachers would come in, they're all experts, you know, in the field. They would walk you through valuation techniques and tools to be able to do very sophisticated brokerage, okay? And most of the top real estate brokers and the real estate agents doing really large, multi-million-dollar transactions have a CCIM certification, okay? So it's really good. It's a great place for you to go get some education, because they'll walk you through the valuation process, they'll walk you through waterfall systems, how to negotiate splits, you know, how to determine costs of construction. It's just, and it's all online these days, and how to work financial calculators and stuff like that. So that's a really good organization, a good place to get some education. The other organization which is really good is ULI. And again, we went through this last week at the back of the real estate primer that I handed out. I'm just taking you to the website so you can see what they look like. ULI is freaking awesome, okay, awesome. Anybody who's anybody in and around the development or the real estate process belongs to the Urban Land Institute. And the chapters here in the Bay Area are some of the strongest in the nation. So all the developers who develop property belong to ULI. And it's a lobbying organization and an education organization also. I could take a whole week class if I wanted to, or a 2-day boot camp, whole week, or a 2-day boot camp on industrial development. How do you build industrial buildings? I could do a whole week on retail, a whole week on apartments, office, storage. It's really amazing. So by the time you do the week or the 2-day boot camp, you have a really good feel for what it takes to develop that kind of product. They have really good education. If anybody wants to go through these, I highly recommend 2 courses, okay? The Real Estate Finance Investments course, which is a boot camp, and then the Excel boot camp, how to do the Excel modeling, because you gotta be able to do the modeling, okay? And I'll walk you through some stuff later on what the, just what some of the balance sheet and the income statement looks like, okay? And I'll bring in some Excel spreadsheets and I'll post some stuff on the website once I start to build it out, okay? But Urban Land Institute's amazing. And they have student rates for students to make it cheap. And the first thing I would do is I would join the Young Leaders group, the Young Leaders. These are all the top people in their 30s and 40s, mostly in their 30s, that are in the industry, and they're amazing. Those are the people you want to network with. If you're serious about this as a career, you got to network, okay? You got to network. I was up in Marin this morning for the Marin Economic Forum. I ran into one of my colleagues who I worked with in 1988. He's running the office for NAI Commercial up in Sarahville. Hey Hayden, hey, you want to go have lunch, a little breakfast, cup of coffee? Hey Hayden, what are you working on these days? What are you doing? Hey Larry, you ever thought about getting back into the brokerage business? Would love to have you come, broker out of our platform. Oh, what, are you still doing research? Hey, you want to do some research for us, and I'll pay you, some money to do the research. Oh, hey, Hayden, I got some really good students at Menlo, you know, and some of the other colleges. They're amazing. Do you got any internships, or do you have any runner positions that I can place them in your company? Yeah, great. Send me the job description. I'll push it out to everybody, and then have them give you a call and follow up. So I'm out there pushing for agents too. Okay, so ULI is pretty amazing. Another is Commercial Real Estate Limited Crew. Okay. Now, you can be a man and join Crew. A lot of guys don't do it. That's why I did it, because there's not a lot of guys there. And you think they're gonna remember me?
Yeah.
Out of like, 300 members, and there's only 3 of us? Yeah, of course. And a lot of it is about differentiating yourself, and feeling comfortable working with people, different genders, races, income levels, education levels. So Crew's amazing. There's scholarships, ladies too. I would go up there, and a lot of these organizations all have scholarships for your classes. So if you knew about them, you could have gone up to the websites and looked at the scholarships and maybe got some money for your real estate courses. Great. And they do have scholarships to send you back to their national conferences too, okay, where you meet a lot of people. Crew's amazing. The Crew Silicon Valley is a great chapter. San Francisco is off the charts. I mean, it's the top, women in commercial real estate. And then the Crew East Bay is really good too. So, I try to build relationships across, go to events to all of them. So I'm building networks within geographies, because everybody's so geographically focused. So if I have pockets of professionals distributed across the Bay Area and the key markets, I can pick up the phone and call somebody, and they can help me out quickly. If I need an attorney or an accountant or whatever I need. Let's see, what else? IREM, Institute of Real Estate Management. This is also, along with the Counselors of Real Estate, IREM is the affiliate of the National Association of Realtors. Okay. So if you want to do, Professor Susan, I want to run my own real estate company, great. Do it. If your parents already have the portfolio, then get all the certifications and the education, go work for your parents, or go work for somebody else and learn how to buy, manage, run, finance real estate, and then go take over your parents' portfolio and grow it. And then be really smart so that nobody steals it, or takes it away, or tries to steal it, or your sister takes it. That happened to to one of my clients. His sister and his mom, basically, the father didn't have an irrevocable trust or a will. So when he died intestate. And basically the mother and the daughter sued him and forced him to sell 3 of the properties at about $10 million each. So they walked away with about $30 million, and then he walked away with the $10 million property that's worth about $20 million today. So he's okay, right? But it destroyed the family because they didn't what?
I feel so bad for them.
Yeah, it was for the mother and the sister. I feel sorry for them too. No Christmas anymore. So IREM, Institute of Real Estate Management, they have the CPM certification. It takes a long time to get through, and you gotta have a portfolio or a property, that you do at the end. And once you get the CPM, you're basically, everybody knows you're an expert in property management or asset management or portfolio management. And I know people who have started as leasing associates, work their way up to assistant property manager, so they're overseeing one property, and then they become a asset manager, so they're overseeing multiple properties and multiple property managers as the asset manager, and then they move up to a portfolio manager, where they're overseeing portfolio managers that are overseeing property managers, overseeing multiple properties, and then usually people from there will go become the president of the company or the COO of the company. So there's IREM's a great organization too. And it's not that expensive to be a member, and they have a lot of really good events. But those are the operations people. The next is BOMA, Building Owners Management Association, BOMA. BOMA's awesome too, really high quality organization, national in focus, actually international in focus. Creates, standards around building measurements. You get certified in BOMA, I forgot, what is it, APR, or I forgot what the certification is. Highly recognized certification, really top-notch organization. Anybody who's anybody, that's managing, institutional grade commercial real estate office buildings of 500 to 1 million square feet, are certified in BOMA. Most are certified in IRM and BOMA. And the top people at the asset management and portfolio level, they all have master's degrees, MBAs in finance with concentrations in real estate. In most cases, they came out of USC or Berkeley or NYU or Columbia or some school like that.
It's the CMCP.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
What is it?
The Certified Manager of Commercial Properties.
Oh, nice, thank you, yeah. So if you look at it, it's really extensive, you do budgeting, capital budgeting, valuation, it's a great organization. They have a really good young leaders group too. So you can get in, they have really good events, and then you tap into your peer group and you go through your careers together. There's another organization, there's a lot of other organizations. There's another organization called SIOR. That's another National Association of Realtors affiliate. These are like CCIMs, they're the top brokers in industrial and office. You belong to SIOR, you're one of the top producers, in industrial and office properties on the investment sales side. Okay. And a lot of people will go into investment sales and then go work for a real estate investment trust or a developer. So they kind of take all that experience of brokering and then bring it over into the institutional side of the business and actually build product, okay? Or acquire product in portfolios. Okay, so those guys are good too. The other is NAIOP, N-A-I-O-P, National Association of Industrial and Office Professionals. Is that right? NAIOP. Now this is another major prestigious organization, and what they do is once you graduate and get a job in the career of real estate, they do these mentoring programs where they have basically a group of 12 young professionals, and the experts in the field, all these people with like 10, 20, 30 years of experience, will basically mentor you for a year. And just, it's basically a career enhancer. I mean, all the top people went through this stuff. It's pretty amazing. Great organization. And every year they have a rivalry where they basically have Cal and Stanford go at each other and compete on a project that they've been given. I kind of don't like it because the other schools can't participate, but it's kind of a Cal-Stanford thing. But it's really interesting to go watch because you can see how the two teams approached the development or the redevelopment and what ideas they came up with in regards to the property's highest and best use and how they financed it. In some cases, it's pretty complex on how you finance it. There's another organization, there's a bunch more, I'm kind of getting burned out on this, is Belden Club. The Belden Club. Now there's Belden Club chapters all over the United States. You have to be, if you want to be a Belden Club member, you got to be interviewed by a member. You have to have experience in the industry, preferably a young leader moving in. And I love it because it's a social organization. They have a lot of events and speakers and stuff, but they do mostly social events, where everybody gets around, drinks beer, and learns about each other, and then you can network with each other. So that's a really good one. The other one is SFREX, SFREX. You gotta get to it through Facebook, they took down their website. But that's another good, social networking organization, and they have a lot of events and stuff like that, which is really good. Okay, so you guys get kind of an idea of, what it's all about and what the organizations are. What I'll do probably next week is, or maybe what you wanna do, and I highly recommend if you're really interested in real estate as a career and real estate capital markets and development and brokerage and asset management and mortgage and all that stuff, go up and look at the MBA program at Cal, okay, through Haas, through the finance department, and go look at the curriculum with a concentration in real estate. I highly recommend if you're serious about this as a career, go get 5 to 7 years experience. Are you looking that stuff up? Is he looking that stuff up? Or is the ADD kicked in? Are you?
Yeah, ADD kicked in.
Okay, that's cool. That's okay, I do that stuff too. So go and look at the real estate program at Berkeley. Look at the professors who teach, not necessarily the PhDs, but the applied people, the career people who teach at Cal. And I would even reach out to them if you're really interested. High quality program, 5-7 years experience. You go do the MBA there. It's going to take you 2 years to get the MBA. Or what you do is you get 7 to 10 years experience and you do an executive, which I highly recommend. You do all this other stuff, in the 5 to 7 years or 7 to 10 years. And then you get your employer to pay for everything, all the licensing, certifications, all of the memberships. And then you convince them and show them of the value that you brought the organization and the position, and then you tell them that you want an MBA from Cal, executive, with a concentration in finance and real estate. It's $150,000, but it's totally worth it, and you get them to pay for it. My company's paid for pretty much all my education, because I negotiated it, okay, upfront. Go look at Stanford, and not Stanford, Stanford doesn't have a real estate program. Go look at University of Southern California, USC. UCLA has a pretty good program, but USC has a better program, okay? Look at their development program, look at their concentration in real estate in their MBA program. It's one of the top, okay, probably the top. ASU, Arizona State, has a pretty good MRED program. If you're interested, it's the low-cost option, but there's a lot of really high-quality developers that have funded that program at ASU. And then the other top programs are NYU, New York University. Columbia is probably my favorite. Chicago really doesn't have, Booth doesn't have really a real estate program or faculty. Obviously Texas A&M and some of the big Texas schools. I mean, Texans are into real estate. So they have some really good programs, like the University of Austin is a top program. And there's some schools in Florida and in Georgia and stuff spattered around. Georgetown has an okay program, but I would rather go to USC or Berkeley if I was going to be on the West Coast. And if I got to choose where I would want to go on the East Coast, it would be probably Columbia first, then either MIT or NYU would be my pick. But if those aren't my picks and I don't want Ivy League, just go to ASU and get it done. Okay. And then University of Denver has an online development program too. There's now online programs too that you can do. Okay, any questions on all of that? It's a very competitive space. The capital markets and real estate converged about 20 years ago, and a lot of the Wall Street people that went to the Ivy Leagues went over to real estate as the investment banks started creating their own mortgage and real estate investment divisions. Okay, so now we got to compete with those guys. And then most of the top people in real estate got their MBAs from the top 10. And Berkeley's got a really strong program. Okay, any questions on that? Was that helpful at all? So I go look at some of those programs, so you can see the curriculum, and what they're learning, at least that way you're thinking about it. Okay. And I wouldn't limit yourself. I've done stuff in financial services, I've done stuff in banking, I've done stuff in real estate, I've done stuff in research. You know, if you have more tools, if you have more toolboxes, you got more tools in your toolbox. If somebody comes to you with an opportunity, you can go to the toolbox that has the tools, or go grab the tools within the multiple toolbox and go solve the problem. Okay, you're not limited. CBRE, Cushman, JLL. I would download the 5 reports. Okay, go do the national report, and then go do the local market report. Get that data as quickly as possible. Okay, I want you to do office, industrial, retail, and apartments. Those are the 4 core property sectors. And you can pick the fifth sector. So it could be storage, could be hotels, could be life science, could be data centers, you know, whatever you want to do. Okay. And then tonight, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the memo structure. I'm going to go through some economics tonight. To start wetting your whistle a little bit on some of the models that I've used and the models I use, and then I'll go through and walk you through the memo so that you can get started on trying to pull this stuff together. Okay, and that will take some time. So everybody clear on the reports and where to get them? You know where to get them? CBRE, Cushman, JLL. I don't care which ones you use, but I would save them down into PDF so that you can capture and pull over the graphs. Okay, and I don't mind you scraping some of the data points for the bullets, but you're gonna have to edit it. Okay, because I can tell when you guys have plagiarized, because I can just tell. But I don't mind you pulling it over, and I'll walk with you and help you and teach you how to edit it down so it's not plagiarized work. Okay, we'll change the language, but you got to read those reports. Okay, because guys like me and others, women, researchers in the field, those are the technical research reports that we write. Okay, and then those reports, components of those reports are then used in underwriting, developments, acquisitions, and mortgage financing, mortgage underwriting. Okay, so the research is a standard and utilized across the whole industry. Okay. Any questions? Okay. Oh, did everybody pick their chapters?
Yes.
Okay. Does anybody know of anybody that's not in the class that hasn't dropped? Are you guys communicating with other people in the class? So I know there was another person over here. What? Yeah, will you touch base with him? See if he's still engaged. Because I don't want to worry about him if I don't have to worry about him. I worry about my students if they don't show up and then they show up like a month later. Stuff. I know he's having some issues, so I'll work with him. But let me know. Stay engaged. I'm going to jump around a little bit. Did everybody fill these out? Did you guys do these? Yeah. Do you have them? Did you staple this to the article? Do you have the article? Yeah. Well, I might have a staple. Why do you want to staple them together? Why would you want to staple them up?
Stays there, better?
Yeah. Because when I drop them, you know, stuff like that, they're going to blow apart. So can you lift them up and show them to me? Okay, got it, good, awesome. That's okay. You don't, do you have the front page?
Yeah.
Okay, I know you don't have it perfect. Do you have yours? Yep, perfect. I'm just gauging to make sure that you guys are staying engaged. So give me like a 30-second. You know, what was it? What was the problem? You know, what did they do? What was the solution? Where did you get the data? And then here's the key to the whole thing. How do you commercialize it? Right? Research is great. Academicians are fabulous at producing research that they can get tenure. A lot of the research is not application. A lot of the research is tenure, okay, oriented. It's not application. But what I do is I look through this stuff and I use this stuff to basically validate or augment my own research projects. So what I'll do is I'll go out, like I'm doing the life science and the data center research right now. I went up to JLL, CB, Cushman. I went and got the data center and the life science and printed off all that research and archived it. Then what I'll do is I'll go to the American Real Estate Society and maybe some others, and I'll start, I'll go in and I'll start looking for peer-reviewed journal articles that have tried to test, what drives valuations or what drives those markets from the academic standpoint. And then what I'll do is I'll go out and I'll look at other research from like Bain and McKinsey, some of these consulting organizations, some of these industry organizations, and see if there's any industry research, and then go try to find some data. Then I've totally exhausted, all of the research, and I know I've covered everything, and then I start to go through it all, consolidate it, edit, write the report, put it in a PowerPoint, and make the presentation. Okay. So, go ahead, just quick and dirty, what was it? What'd you learn? And if you could use it for decision-making purposes, either as a consultant or somebody inside the firm, or if there's a product at some point later on as you kind of build your skill sets. I'll train you how to be a product developer.
Okay.
Either on the development side, but on the research side too. Because I build process, I build product, I do research, I do these stuff, all value add.
Okay.
For clients.
So my journal was on natural hazards and local land development.
Cool.
And essentially it was just kind of talking about how natural disasters are kind of more affluent for land development because it just frees up land in a lot of cases versus undeveloped lands, which can be basically better for like material development and like on the local landscape scene. So most of this data was from like the U.S. countries.
What year was it published?
It was published in 2017.
Okay, so it's relatively recent.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, it was done by like two students, one from like Rice University and another from Texas State.
Yeah, they weren't students, were they students or were they professors? Or usually the professors will work with the students too.
I think they were students actually.
Oh, cool. And they got published, that's awesome.
Yeah. And then, and what else should I talk about, essentially?
Later on, I just want to get everybody comfortable with, doing quick synopses on their research. Later on, I'll be really interested in knowing, where'd they get the data? And what kind of statistical techniques did they utilize to get the information and come up with the conclusions? You don't have to do that yet. Or if you want to, go for it. Okay, show off that co-integration and regression and logistic regression. Throw out some statistical techniques because I'm trying to engineer you to think more sophisticated in regards to doing the data analysis and research because it's impressive, right? You don't have to necessarily do it, but if you read these articles, they get easier and easier to read, and you can really start focusing in on what was the problem, how did they approach it, what was the models that they used, what was the data that they used, how did they crank the numbers, and what were the results?
Yeah.
Okay.
So in this case, they use two different like ways to kind of evaluate data. They did spatial panel models, and then they did simultaneous equation models.
Nice.
And kind of what they found was, well, they basically didn't talk about like the way to commercialize it.
Okay, that's going to be up to you.
Okay.
Okay, so that's going to be where I drive you later on is, because what I do is I usually go to these conferences. Okay, I present my own research, but I listen to all the other papers that are being presented, and it gives me idea. These people are doing R&D, research and development, but it gives me ideas on how to apply some of their techniques in my own research. Or what I do is I'll go up to them afterwards and say, I'm working on the exact same thing. Do you want to collaborate? Or would you consider doing some of this stuff in your research, and then we could publish together? Or you might wanna think about doing something this way, because I see what you're doing, but you're kind of missing the direct, outcome. If you look at this other stuff, it might help your research. So I help them and I advise them on how to make the research better. But it's really us in industry
As a whole.
that look at that stuff and say, we're gonna use this for commercialization.
Okay.
We're gonna make money off this stuff. Okay,
Okay.
go ahead.
I don't have mine.
Okay, next. Oh, you'll have to do two next week.
What's this one?
Oh, I haven't done it either.
Okay, you guys gotta get on it next.
My article compared Shanghai's economic influence to New York, London, and Hong Kong. And it talked about how it's going to be an emerging market. And it's going to bridge the gap between the West and China.
And what is Singapore?
No, Shanghai.
Shanghai, oh, interesting. Yeah, except for the virus
Yeah,
situation
well,
in
this was in
Xi's,
November. Yeah.
Xi's, basically total dictatorship in regards to
Well, that's
China policy.
that was the whole thing.
That
It's
was
like-
it?
Well, it's like while there's a lot of upside, there's also a lot of risk. In
Yeah.
Investing in China.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that's a great paper, because, when you look at, central business districts or money center locations across the globe, they're all pretty much the same in how they manage capital flows and finance flows. That creates intensity in land use, which creates downtowns. Most hubs like that are all central business districts with huge concentrations of finance, industries. But if you look at if you're gonna be an investor, you're a global institutional investor that needs to place $20 billion on a global basis annually, which a lot of these Saudi sovereign funds need to place that much capital. You're looking at all of those geographic locations, and you're gonna have to underwrite the politics in the economic system and the legal system. Okay, nice job. And then talk to me later about where they got the data, or was it more of a policy paper?
Yeah.
So it didn't really collect data and, calculate, different types of, statistical techniques to parse out the variables and the influence and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it was more author speculation, it seems.
Okay, so it was a historical analysis?
Yeah.
Okay,
Like,
okay, that's great.
My paper was on, not paper, but research was on financial regulation and whether it's good or bad for real estate companies within Europe. So basically what they did in the article is they looked at 3 reforms, right? One targeting bank debt to the sector of real estate, another direct funds, and one more the trading and the cost of debt capital. What they ended up using for data, Thomson data stream,
Yeah.
and then the 15 largest companies within Germany, France, and Britain.
So they were looking at the real estate companies,
Yes.
and then the financial institution, or the financial regulation
Yeah, how
of
the
the system.
regulation affected those,
Interesting.
whether it was good or bad.
So what was the conclusions? Did they find speculative bubbles in real estate asset prices?
Well, so they ended up using, it was 3 reforms, right? And then they looked at those and how they affected the companies. 2 of the reforms actually benefited the companies with, oh Lord, sorry, I have a lot of stuff.
That's okay.
Systematic risk, not having there were 2 of them that didn't have
Okay,
systematic risk.
you gotta listen. Unless it's an emergency, Okay, go ahead. Because you're gonna miss out, and then the problem is when you get distracted and you zone out, you're gonna miss something and it can't come back. Okay, I mean, even though I do videotape it, you just missed a piece of it and you can't get it back. Okay.
2 of them didn't have systematic risk
Mhm.
and actually helped lead to increased sales and a bunch of other stuff. They actually used debt to equity and loan to value ratios in order to judge whether or not they increased or decreased. And yeah.
Did they have policy recommendations? Obviously they did.
They had, so to basically sum it up, it was try to create regulations that improve the real estate market.
Of course,
That's the easiest
course.
way to put it.
of
yeah.
course. Go ahead.
I did an evaluation, I found one on the evaluation of resorts in
Oh, cool.
Jackson, Wyoming.
Nice. So the geography was the state of Wyoming?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it used the hedonic modeling,
Nice.
and it compared the, like the resorts and then the agriculture property,
Mm.
and the difference between those. It was published in 1998, so it's a little old, but
What were some of the variables that they found that drove resort valuations? Was it intensity of ag land, or is that what you said?
yeah.
Was there any other variables in there, like zoning, or,
I'm not sure. I think it had to do with zoning because.
you gotta have an airport, right, to get to the resorts?
Yeah.
So you gotta have transportation infrastructure.
I think it's because there's one thing about public grazing leases, so they had to have a certain amount of, I think there was a certain amount of agricultural land or something. I can't remember though.
And then what kind of resorts were there? Or was just all kinds of resorts? Were they huge mixed-use resorts like golf?
Yeah, there's all resorts. It didn't really specify any.
They didn't segment it out or anything like that?
Not that I remember.
Okay. Was there something in there, if you were to read that article, that would give you some insights on how to make investment decisions in resorts in Wyoming or someplace else?
Close to Jackson Hole, I guess, because I found
Well, that
part of
makes
it said, Jackson Hole averages 22,000 per acre, and then agricultural land averages 344 per acre.
So there's another one, right? If you already have an established branded resort, you build your resorts or buy resorts around, you know, those major resorts. So you can piggyback on the, you know, all the input, you know, of people and economics and, you know, coming in. Because you want that cluster, right, as a municipality, because you're getting tax revenues, right, to support your police and healthcare and schools and, you know, all the public infrastructure. Okay, nice job.
I didn't get the memo for this one.
Okay, so I got a couple. I gotta get you started to,
Yeah, I do.
oh yeah, of course, okay. But you're gonna tell us about, you know, what drives office prices in Sydney, you know,
Yeah, no worries.
Melbourne. And or maybe what the fire effects will have on, you know, capital inflows and foreign direct investment and capital flows into Australian real estate. I know it's a little soon,
That's fine.
you know, but, you know, there's an impact right there. There's gonna be an environmental impact that could cause, people to decide, maybe I'm not gonna invest in, you know, Sydney office, I'm gonna go to, you know, maybe I'm gonna go to Christchurch, or probably not gonna go to New Zealand, I'll probably go to Seoul, Korea, or something like that. But, you know, capital flows could be diverted.
Yeah, well, they kind of moved back. They actually went into Sydney more than away, so the fires were more along the coastline.
Okay,
Everything that they had, like in remote areas where real estate offices were for like country, New
Yeah,
South Wales
okay.
or Sydney, they all started moving inwards to new areas such as the city.
oh, interesting. So you've seen
Yeah,
economic migration and population migration.
exactly. Yeah.
Well, is that gonna have an effect on real estate?
Mine was on forecasting demand for commercial real estate based
Nice.
on economic developmental, fundamental, I can't read my writing.
Okay, what do we
Of,
talk about writing skills?
Yeah,
Yeah.
of US metro markets.
Okay, that's a good one.
So it talks about like the long-term like commercial real estate and how it like depends on relative attractiveness, and they kind of compared it to for each metro market, they compared it to other metro markets.
That's good.
So they said economic growth models can generate reliable forecasts
Mm.
for the commercial real estate demand.
That makes sense.
And kind of like what I found was what was it? Economic development factors largely determine metro areas like competitiveness in the long term.
Mhm.
And they kind of talked about how they should really focus on like the long term than kind of like the short term of
Mhm.
it, on how new developments come up in different metro markets.
Yeah, economic development is big, isn't it? I mean, what are you trying to do when you're conducting economic development policy at the local or the regional level? What's your main objective? When you're formulating and implementing economic development policy strategy, what's your main objective? No?
Oh no.
No? what's the motivation of most city governments? Or government? What's the motivation? What are they trying to do? What's their goal? What's government's role in society? What's it trying to do?
Regulate.
Yeah, what? Yeah, regulate, but what's the goal and objective? What's the ultimate goal and objective?
To make sure it keeps going, stabilize.
Keep growing, right? Okay. So do you just want to grow for growth purposes, like Houston? No zoning. You can build whatever you want anywhere you want. Is that a good strategy?
No,
You want manufacturing plants next to residential suburban housing?
no.
Now, do you want a zone, put the manufacturing in the manufacturing zone, keep it away from the residential housing in the downtown?
Order then? Is it kind of like an order, establishing like an order?
First thing is to establish the order, and then they want to promote the growth, but what's the ultimate goal and objective at the end of the day from economic growth? Economic development. What's the goal of, you just don't do things for no
Is
reason.
it employment?
Huh?
With employment?
So you're gonna generate employment, excellent, and when you generate employment, what happens?
Generate revenue?
You generate tax revenues, and if you get tax revenues, you get to do what? Spend it on what?
Making more money?
By doing what?
Yeah,
Depends on the city, like upkeep.
Yeah, you have infrastructure, you're gonna put in 5G networks, you're gonna pave the roads, you're gonna put in better transportation infrastructure, you're gonna put in electric vehicles, so that reduces all the pollution, so you end up increasing the quality of life, you plow back into your schools and healthcare and fire and safety, so that people feel good about living there, and what happens if people feel good and they live there, what happens?
Grow?
Spread
They
word
tell
of
their
mouth,
friends, and then
take
people
on
find
more.
out and they start moving there. And then if you can organize the economic growth and not create sprawl or what is called negative externalities, I mean, you're gonna get higher social welfare and higher standards of living for everybody who lives within that geography. Okay. And actually, a lot of the cities in California have done a pretty good job, but what's one of the biggest problems right now in California? One of the biggest issues.
Right. Overcrowding?
There's overcrowding, but what's the biggest issue?
Traffic.
Traffic's an issue.
taxi.
Taxes is an issue. These are all kind of compounded.
Price?
The price, the cost, yes, that's another issue. What else? The obvious one. If the,
It's
co-
too light.
if the cost structures are too much, it basically displaces people and puts them on the street. You actually exacerbate poverty. And then the poverty moves into psychosis, neuroses, and pathologies, and you end up having higher crime rates. And you end up, unfortunately, enabling the poverty issue and the pathologies through, unfortunately, fentanyl and other types of addictive drugs. So you have a major psychosis issue. You have some pathologies that you have to deal with. Okay, and that's the major problems that occur with urbanization, is having to deal with pockets of poverty. Just go to Sao Paulo, go to Vietnam, go to some of these other emerging markets, and look at compare them to U.S. cities and European cities, and see what they're like. And they're extreme. You got shanty towns, you got huts, you got adobe buildings, and you got high-rise apartment buildings and condos selling for millions of dollars. So a dichotomy. Okay. Yes.
Okay, so my article looked at the cash-only real estate transactions and property prices in San Francisco after
interesting.
the 2008
What journal
recession.
was that from? Was that from the Housing Journal, or was that in one of the?
No, it was actually just by a university in Argentina.
Oh, really? Was it
that
published, or
conducted
did they
research.
it was like unpublished paper or something
It
like
was a
that?
scholarly
Oh, was it?
article.
Oh, interesting. And when was it published?
2016.
Oh, that's really recent.
Yeah.
Cool.
And basically, like, the main result that I saw was that they do not support using mortgage interest rates in forecasting real estate demand and prices.
So they didn't include mortgage interest rates?
They don't recommend using that to
Oh,
forecast.
as one of the variables?
Yeah, that's just like the result of what they found.
Oh, they found that they got a better model when they didn't include mortgage interest rates in the model.
Yeah, it just wasn't very accurate, because basically, when the recession hit, they saw a lot of European investors
Mhm.
paying all for cash,
Yeah, yeah.
cash everything,
Yeah,
and that made it really hard for people here to
Yeah.
compete with that,
yeah,
and so they wanted to look at how that
yeah,
actually affected everything, but they didn't think it had as big of an argument as people thought it would.
yeah, yeah.
Or-
I bet if you went to other markets, cause San Francisco's an international market,
Yeah, right,
it's supply constrained.
yeah,
And then with negative interest rates on a global basis after the financial crisis, and because of Xi's policies and because of the recession in Europe, a lot of capital was flowing into places like Vancouver and San Francisco, and most of the significant portion of the housing activity was all cash deals by foreigners,
yeah,
until they kind of clamped it down. But the mortgage interest rate variable, if you looked at other markets, maybe like Las Vegas or commodity markets,
No,
not a
that's-
supply constrained market, but a commodity market, that interest rate sensitivity or the interest rate variable would have an impact on home prices. Did they say that?
no, that was one of my recommendations I put
Oh, okay,
for just future research.
okay, cool. That's a great article.
So mine was called The Role of Industrial Parks in Economic Development.
Okay,
So basically it was about how industrial parks become the center of growth and innovation. They create jobs, improve local productivity, and they maintain a competitive environment. And then this study was taking place in Romania, and
it's international.
so there was a 50% increase in attraction on, I don't know what side it was, but then they said that in southern and western regions, the attraction was only 25%. So the one that had 50% had industrial parks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then it just kind of gave a lot of like benefits of of having industrial parks in cities, and
Mhm.
what it provides to the city.
A lot of the industrial is a cheap product, property sector. They're called concrete tilt-up buildings. So you basically build the walls, with concrete and supports, you tilt them up, you slap on the roofs, you tie them together, so you can basically build them very quickly. So when the market turns, you can shut down the supply very quickly, so the markets are regulated, they're very responsive. There's some markets that have really crappy buildings, that have been around a long time, maybe in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. A lot of those buildings are functionally and physically obsolete and deteriorated. A lot of that stock is older stock, which is basically primed to just buy up, scrape it, or create a economic policy to rezone the area and basically buy out all those buildings through what is called eminent domain, and bring in a large industrial park developer and create a 1 million square foot, Amazon facility, to do intermodal shipping of Amazon goods in Romania. And then you have all the suppliers and other types of companies that'll cluster around that big industrial park. So industrial parks are global institutional products, tied directly to warehousing, distributions, and import exports on a global basis. Okay, so that's an interesting article. Continue to do these articles, formulate a research paper. Okay, that was really a test to get you to start thinking if there's a certain area in which you want to focus a research paper on. Let's keep talking so I can refine your research objectives, and then pull together the papers. And what you'll do is those surveys that you fill out will be the basis of the body of the paper, and I'll walk you through how to pull that stuff together into a research paper very quickly, okay, formatted and everything. And then those working papers, those are called working papers with the articles, will be thrown into the appendix. So you'll give me a nice report, professionally bounded at the end of the semester, that you can show a potential employer that you know how to write a report, do the research, make the recommendations, and to be able to show them that you can write how to write a research report. Okay.
Where do we get more of these?
Huh?
Where do we get more of these?
You can, take, oh, you mean the actual papers?
Yeah.
Oh, I gotta get you more of those. I'll make some extra copies of them. I don't think I have any, what?
Are they on the
I haven't posted them yet, but I'll send them to you. And then you can get them from these journals, and then you can go to the library, okay, and get peer-reviewed journal articles. I would go through the American Real Estate Society, and if you need my username and password to get access to the articles, you can do that. You should be able to get them through EBSCO and ProQuest, and I would even go to the research library and come up with your research thesis, you know, what it is you want to research, and let her do, you know, help you walk you through to do the research and go find the articles.
In our research paper, are we gonna be trying to to prove something, or are we just trying to get as much information about?
Well, like, what did you do? Yours was on office values?
Metro markets.
Yeah, metro markets.
Forecasting demand for commercial real estate.
Yeah, so you could do that, right? And you could go find, you know, office, industrial, retail, the same type of research across the different property sectors. Or what you could do is take that paper and then find some other articles, you know, talking directly about the different types of markets.
Okay.
So taking the same methodology, instead of across a panel, you're now drilling down into the individual cases, you know, individual metro areas.
Okay.
That would be interesting to do, you know, multiple case studies focused on, you know, use that one article as the one overriding article, and then go find, you know, do 4 metro areas, or go find another article with 3 metros, or, you know, a third article and then 2 metros, however you want to mix it. But that would be a great topic. So this was just to kind of get you thinking. Okay, all right. What I want to do now is you should have this. You should have this one. If you don't, I'll have some extra copies. And then also pull out the memo too, so that you can start thinking about that. So I need this. I need this. And then I think the pre-test. Does anybody have a pre-test on it? I can remember what that is. I'll go over this stuff next week. So everybody's on the, oh, this is good. Okay. Yeah, just use a reader. Perfect. Yeah, just use a reader. Real estate investment trust. Okay, so you can see the line items for how a publicly traded real estate company.
Yeah, I have it, it's printed
Perfect.
out, it's just not.
Yeah. No problem. Okay. So let's do this one. Okay. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do supply demand analysis. And then we're gonna go over the memos. So how much time do we have? Okay, so we'll get through as much as we can. I wanna set, you know, kind of a solid foundation. What I'll do is, go ahead and read the chapters. I'll post the PowerPoint presentation so you have something to look at.
On Mole?
Huh?
On Mole?
Yeah, I'll start building that out. Okay, but you can start reading it and stuff like that. Okay, so you're welcome. So this should get you kickstarted, okay? So let's do this, all right? So there's 2 ways of looking at real estate markets. One is over its cycle, okay, and the other is using supply-demand analysis. They're related to each other, but they're 2 cognitively different analyses, okay? The real estate economist thinks in not only cyclical terms, but also in supply-demand analysis. The developer thinks about things in supply-demand analysis, but the top real estate principals that I know who have run, you know, multi-million, multi-billion-dollar operations. Most of these people are in their 50s and 60s. A lot of them are in their 60s. So if they got in the business in their 20s, and they're 50 years old, they've been through three real estate cycles, okay? And they remember what it feels like, going into the decline phase, you know, into the recession, into recovery, into growth, into peak, into decline. So they have basically an internal memory of those cycles, and they learn from those cycles, and they learn how to forecast, you know, the cycles, which becomes extremely valuable. Okay, and I'll go over the cycle analysis. This report was designed by Glenn Mueller. Okay, and I met Glenn. We worked on a project in, I think it was in like. It was probably like, we were working together in 94, in there, okay? And they had hired him to work with us to work on a investment program. He has lots of institutional experience. He actually went on and established the investment research department for like Mason out of in Baltimore. So he was their chief financial economist. He's been at multiple universities. He produces a plethora of research. He's an applied person, but he's also an academic, and he moves back and forth between the two worlds. And I think he's actually doing real estate development, apartment development in Denver. So he goes all the way down to the construction level, okay? And then all the way up to the cerebral strategy level. So he's pretty amazing guy. But he designed this, he wrote the original paper on this, I think in like '92. Where basically he states that real estate markets go through different cycles, different phases of the real estate cycle, and that you can plot the markets in their cycle, and you can also project where they're going to go in the cycle, okay? And I'll walk you through how it actually works. But on the front page, he does this quarterly, and the first one he shows the property sectors and where they are in the cycle, okay? And these the markets in the cycle right now, this was 2018, we're in 2020, so it was only a year and a half ago. Most of these property sectors are in the same phase, or just a little bit later in the phase, because we're not in recovery coming out of recession, and we're not going into recession yet. So everybody's like in this middle growth, and I'll go through the economics of that.
So at each one of these points, like
Yeah.
like point 6 is office and suburban.
Yeah.
So essentially at that point in that quarter, that's when
Yeah, I'll go through that.
Okay.
Exactly what you're,
Okay.
what it is, what each point on the line is.
Okay.
Okay, let me walk you through that. Okay. But you're on the right track. Okay, by asking those questions. Then on the next page, he talks about the different quadrants, okay, and what they are. And I'll go through these by myself too. But he states that right here, there's a line right here. That's long-term occupancy rate. And there's two equilibrium points. One here and one there. Okay. And this line, you should write next to this line, right here, occupancy rate and rental growth rates. Okay.
Where?
Right here, next to it. See this line right here, the cycle line? That line is occupancy rates and rental growth rates. Okay. Could also be price appreciation rates, change in price, the growth rates and prices. Could be that too. You know, and I'll get into the theory around this. But basically what he states is when you're in phase 1, that is your recovery phase. Then markets move into expansion, then into hypersupply, then into recession. So those are the four phases, okay? And then you could be at, you know, each property sector or each geography or each property sector geography could be plotted along that line. And I actually used his research and gave points for each point along the curve, and I'll go through that today, because I actually took his model and used it as an input into my market selection models. And then down below this, he talks about the different, what the markets are going through. So in phase one, at the very beginning, there's no new supply in the market. The construction has dropped. There's no new construction, but there's no demand. So occupancy rates are really low and rents are flat, okay? And then all of a sudden, job growth occurs. The Fed lowers interest rates, or the Congress lowers taxes to stimulate the economy to create job growth, okay? Industrial production or GDP growth rates. That economic activity creates job growth. Jobs basically, if you need to hire people, you gotta put them someplace, right? In an office building, industrial, retail. So as you hire more people, they occupy more space, they absorb more space, drive up occupancy rates, drive up rents, and drive up prices. And that's the logic that we went over last week. So then you move up the occupancy curve, rents are rising, and then you hit the first equilibrium point. Okay, you guys should be writing notes on this stuff. So you hit the first equilibrium point. When you hit equilibrium at the structural occupancy rate, rents are growing at the local inflation rate. Okay, just write that in. At that point, there's no new construction. Okay, because I'll walk you through later on the supply-demand analysis. So real estate as a market, the supply curve is completely inelastic in the short run. No other market's like that, and I'll walk you through those nuances. So it takes time. Rents have to get to a certain point, prices have to get to a certain point where prices are higher than the cost of construction to get the developers to start developing, okay? So there's no new construction here, but there's lots of job growth that's occurring. So what happens is, since there's no new supply, all of a sudden, occupancy rates start to move up quickly, absorption, and then you get what is called rent spikes, okay, rent spikes. And that's when rents are increasing about 20%, okay, per year or per quarter, every 6 months. So rents are going through the roof. Like we did here with apartment rents, right, in 2006 and 7, and then rents were spiking in 2013, 14, 15 here, okay. Then all of a sudden new supply comes online. You start to move into phase 3, which is hyper supply. The banks are lending, new construction's finally coming online, and that's pushing down occupancy rates, and rental growth rates are starting to slow. And price appreciation rates are also starting to slow. But since this equilibrium point right there, since the occupancy rates are still above the structural occupancy rate, lenders are going, the market's still healthy, so we're going to continue to provide mortgage financing for construction. And usually by the time you get deep into phase 3, we probably have started to move into the decline phase of the business cycle, and we're starting to enter a recession, unless the Federal Reserve steps in to try to re-stimulate the economy.
And what about when you hit that next equilibrium point?
Once you hit that equilibrium point, since you're still in equilibrium on the occupancy rate, rents are still growing at the local inflation rate.
And then it just stops?
Then what'll happen is we fall into a recession, and you fall into phase 4. So you start to move into a recession. You can't shut down commercial construction, right, instantaneously, because I've already entitled it. It's under construction, I got the bank financing. Yeah, things are deteriorating pretty quickly, but I can't just shut down construction and lay everybody else off and have a vacant, half-built building like you see in Mexico and Brazil and Argentina and some of these other emerging markets. So they gotta actually, complete it. And that just adds additional supply to the market, driving occupancies down, driving rents negative, rent growth negative, driving valuations down. And then at this point, you have your occupancy rates are falling, your rents are falling, your valuations, your appreciation is starting to turn negative, and then you have all this oversupply, and you're in a recession. That's the worst case scenario. And then eventually the new supply burns off, you go back to phase one and you sit there and wait until the Fed does something to re-stimulate the economy, to kickstart the real estate cycle again.
For example, like what's an example?
There's always been a cycle, okay? And what I did was I went back, and I'll show you the presentation. I went back 80 years. I went back 80 years, and I looked at industrial production. Year over year, it's produced on a monthly basis, along with non-farm employment. So I did a year over year change in non-farm employment. I'll show it to you. But if you do that, it looks like a cycle, right? And what I found, which was really, really interesting, is that 2008, 2009. The last one was 2001, 2003. The one before that was 1991 and 1993. The one before that was 1982, 1984. Do you see a pattern here? Yeah, every 10 years. Right? And what I did was I hacked up the decades. Into phases like this. And found out that, except for this period right here, and I could go back to the 70s, the 60s, the 50s, the 40s. I couldn't use 40s because we were in World War II. But I could go back 80 years. I even went back 150 years. Jumped the world wars and went back even further and found out that there was a 90% probability of a recession.
Roughly every 10 years.
Not only every 10 years, but in the first 5 years of every decade.
That sucks.
So it was recurring. We were in a recession,
It's kind of sense.
in a real estate recession, in the business cycle, GDP, industrial production, job growth. I could be looking at occupancies and rent growth. I could be looking at real estate factors. They're correlated to each other. So real estate cycles are highly correlated to the business cycle. So if you understand where we are in the business cycle, you can forecast where the real estate markets are going to go.
So that's what you were talking about last class with buying now and then building a contract that's like 5 years long, and kind of protecting yourself to.
Yeah,
because
if it's let me test you, and then you guys can become real estate. You're already real estate economists already because you did all the research and you guys are there right now. If there is a recession in the first 5 years of every decade, right? And the 2008-2009 recession was an anomaly. We've only had a recession in the last 5 years of the decade twice in 80 years, 1958 and 2008, so twice. All the other recessions occurred in the first 5 years of every decade. And I found out that there was a 70% probability of being in the growth phase, in growth peak phase of the business cycle in the last 5 years of every decade. In the last 5 years of every decade. So these were the first 5 years of every decade. These were the last 5 years of every decade. So there's a 90% probability of recession in the first 5 years of every decade. And there's a 75% probability you'll be in growth peak phase in the last 5 years of every decade.
That's great odds.
Huh?
That's great odds.
It is, it's really good odds.
For betting.
And this is just using cycle analysis, okay, and probability. So the test question is, where are we right now? Are we in the first 5 years or the last 5 years of the decade?
First.
We're in the first 5 years, but we just ended, right?
Mm-hmm.
The last 5 years of the decade. So if this was 2019, what's the probability of a recession based on the cycle analysis? No, 2019.
Oh, 7.
So, 70% probability that we will continue to be in a growth peak, right? But what about 2021 and 23, based off this? What's the probability of a recession between 2021 and 23? Yeah, it's really high, right?
Is it what are the factors that cause that? Because
Cause recessions?
yeah, like what would like in each of those
Yeah.
like years, what was like
Yeah.
the biggest like?
Yeah.
I don't know, I'm sure you looked into what
Yeah.
was the biggest like.
Yeah,
trend
what
factor.
happened was, at the peaks here, okay, where you had really high valuations, okay? And you had really, in the early periods, you had really low interest rates. The Federal Reserve, lowers interest rates to stimulate the economy. 9 times out of 10, the Federal Reserve keeps interest rates too low too long. So it creates asset price bubbles in real estate. And then what they do is they freak out, okay? And what the Federal Reserve does, and this happens every freaking time, is the Federal Reserve here, right, in the recessions, will drive the yield curve, will drive interest rates really low. These are maturities on the government securities, and these are interest rates. Interest rates, yield to maturities on US Treasuries. By maturity, 1 year, 3 year, 7 year, 10 year, 30 year. So interest rates are higher for longer maturity bonds. So in this period, right here, in these recessions, the Federal Reserve buys these short-term bonds, drives up bond prices, and drives down interest rates to lower the cost of capital to stimulate the economy, to get people to consume and invest more. But what happens is that at the peak here, as the economy starts to overheat, inflation, stock price bubbles, real estate bubbles, the Federal Reserve, one of their mandates, one of their roles is to regulate asset price bubbles in the economy. So what they do is as the economy starts to overheat, they start to sell off the short-term bonds and drive down bond prices and drive up interest rates to cool the economy. So the yield curve starts to flatten. And usually what happens is right before the peak, like a year before all of these peaks, the yield curve inverts. You have an inverted yield curve. The inverted yield curve has been the most accurate predictors of recessions. Of any metric, we use a lot of different metrics as economists, but the yield curve inversion has like a 98% probability of forecasting a recession, okay? And based off the research, once the yield curve inverts, the market, both the stock market and the real estate market, peaks 1 year later. So once it inverts, the asset prices for real estate and stocks peak. Then you're in a recession in 24 months. It's like clockwork. Okay. If you go back and you study all this stuff, you can see it happens every single time. So when the yield curve inverts, the stock market and the real estate market peaks a year later, and you're within a recession in 24 months. Okay. Now, the yield curve 2 months ago inverted for the first time since 2006 to 2007. First time it inverted. Okay, and the Federal Reserve saw what happened, and the market sold off in the stock market. People were freaking out because it's an indicator of a recession. And what the Federal Reserve did is it started to print money again, quantitative easing, up to about 40 billion a month again for the first time since the Great Recession, to inject liquidity into the system, to basically get the yield curve to go normal again, to be upward sloping again, and try to reflate the economy to keep it from going into a recession. Now, I think the Fed will probably continue to do that past the election, but at some point in time, the Fed's gonna pull back and try to pop or to bring down stock prices and real estate prices, because commercial real estate prices, and particularly stock prices, are severely overvalued. And that's one of their rules. So, and then if it happens, where are we now, 2020? So what's the probability of a recession this year, within an election year?
90%.
Of a recession in an election year? Do you think the Fed wants to be known as being politically influencing the outcome of an incumbent president? Or do they want to create an economic environment that will allow basically politics to sort itself out without having an influence on the economy? That's what they're trying to do. So when do you think that the Federal Reserve is probably going to start raising interest rates?
2022.
21,
The,
right? So if they invert the curve in 21, when's the recession?
23. 24 months later.
Basically goes within our forecast period, basically 21 to 23. Now, if you ask other economists when they think the recession's gonna hit, they won't tell you. Okay, they're not gonna tell, they won't tell the truth. They'll say they can't forecast a recession, so they won't even try. That's not very helpful for
I was
clients.
gonna ask, how many people have the
I got
ability?
no problem forecasting a recession
Yeah.
based on this theory, using psychoanalysis to do it. But a lot of these economists work for financial institutions and large corporations and real estate companies, and you can't have your economist forecasting a recession. So what they do is they mitigate, and they say slow growth. Okay, but I got no problem because it's pretty consistent, right? Things could change, but there's a real high probability that after the election, the Fed's gonna step in and raise interest rates to cool the real estate and the stock market and try to bring inflation down, because inflation's starting to accelerate.
Why wouldn't they just want their economists to be honest with them and so they can prepare for?
That's been my philosophy in the career. I've gotten laid off for being honest. But, you have to kind of, why did you hire an economist in the first place? Yeah, okay, but that's good marketing. But again, at the end of the day, what you want to be able to do is to forecast recessions and turning points in the market so that you can put together some risk management strategies to try to mitigate the damage, not only on the liability side of your balance sheet, but also on the asset side of the balance sheet. So I think it's just prudent to do it. So it's interesting. So that's kind of a high level psychoanalysis. Did everybody, I'll show you some data behind it, but it's pretty compelling in my view. From just using technical economic and real estate psychoanalysis, just using history, it looks like the cycles are persistent, consistent. Over time, they seem to occur every 7 to 10 years, and that the recessions occur in the first 5 years of every decade, and you're in growth peak in the last 5 years of every decade. The guys that have been around and women who have been in the industry for a long time with 30, 40 years experience have gone through these, and they know it. So they know that what they're gonna do is they're probably gonna par back or stop the construction at this point, stabilize the asset, and then go into cash or hunker down. Get through the recession, and then start to, some investors are contrarian. They will buy here, because most of the values have actually dropped already. There's nobody in the marketplace at this point. There's no liquidity, there's no bank financing, and the prices have dropped significantly. And they come in when nobody's in the market, and they pick up trophy assets at very low prices. And then some people will buy here. These are all contrarians. But most of the investors and most of the developers will come in here or in here because they want to make sure that the cycle is in momentum. They see job growth, production. They see that the Fed's continue to hold interest rates down. There's lots of capital flows coming in, so they get on the bandwagon and they ride the cycle up. These are more risk-averse investors. These are contrarian investors. These guys don't care about anything but return, right? They don't care about risk, because they're willing to go into these risky markets and buy properties when nobody's buying. Okay, and then we're here, right? We're here. We're at the peak of the cycle right now. Pricing's at its all-time high. Rents are at their all-time high. Job growth is still strong, unemployment's still low, cap rates are really low. People are still in the market, but sales volume has been declining for 2 years, okay, which is an indicator, another indicator of the cycle. Okay, when sales volume's increasing, you know you're moving up into the cycle. When sales volume's starting to fall or slow, you know you're in the downside of the cycle. Okay. So those are a lot of the indicators that I look at when I'm looking at these cycles. So let's do this really quickly, and then I'll ask you a question. So you got the 4 quadrants. You're going to need to draw this out, because I'm going to have it on the quiz. Okay. So I'm going to test you how you draw out the cycles, and I'll ask you, where's San Francisco office, where's San Francisco apartments, where's Peninsula retail, where are they along the cycle, so that you can, start thinking. So the first thing you do is you set up the phases. Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. What's the first phase? Recovery. What's the second?
Expansion.
What's the next one?
Hypersupply.
Yeah, hypersupply. And what's the 4th one?
Recession.
Yeah, recession. And it looks like this. Oops, I overshot it. I'll tell you, being an economist, having to draw this stuff out is tough. Some of you are probably gonna maybe you guys wanna teach someday, or you're gonna be in a meeting, and you guys are gonna have to jump up onto the whiteboard and start diagramming some stuff out, so you gotta get comfortable. So remember, this is occupancy rate. And rental growth rate. So everybody knows how to do percentage changes? You know how to calculate a percentage change?
Less cost.
You know how to calculate a percent change? So I got price, right, and T equals 0 today, right? Oh, sorry, price equals T plus 1 minus price T equals 0 divided by price T equals 0 equals the rent change over price appreciation so you know how to calculate price changes. So this is what 2020, 2019, 2019. Right? You guys know how to do that? Calculate a percentage change? I hope so.
No, I don't know.
Should have gotten it in your intermediate algebra, in your basic arithmetic in 8th grade or something like that.
I've seen a lot of formulas, but I'm sorry, I'm not right.
Well, if this is $100 a square foot, right? If this is $110 a square foot,
I've never seen that.
right? And this is $100 a square foot, right? Or $100 square foot for rent, or $100 square foot for rent, divided by $100. What's the rental? What's the percentage change? 10%.
It's way more complicated.
What about this one? 110 divided by 100, right? It's only 1 year, right? So it's 1 divided by 1. Right? So what's this?
That's 10.
What is it?
10.
10? Right? Right? Like that. Minus 1. What is it? By 1. 100. You can do it that way too.
Dude.
So which way do you wanna do it? Which way do you wanna do it, this way or that way?
I think the second one.
Yeah, because can't I just go like this and go
Price
one
divided by
point
price.
1 0, no, it's 10%. So I don't have to go through the other two steps. So by doing it like this way, you can do it in your head. This way is a little bit harder. You have 3 steps to go through instead of
So
basically
it's
6.
like, how do you even know?
It doesn't work when prices go down, it's a little bit harder. You gotta subtract 1, figure it out, and then multiply by 100, but it's faster
Yeah.
to do it like this. Because I know if it's 1.1, I know it's 10%.
It's current
I don't have
price.
to subtract out the 1 and multiply by 100, I don't have to do the other 2 steps. So it's really just 1 step.
Are you? It's just current price over past price, right?
That's all it is.
Oh, okay. I was just like trying to
No, it's
analyze if
simple.
you were over.
No,
Okay.
no,
Yeah.
some people don't even know how to calculate percentage changes. So I gotta walk through that in all my classes, okay? There's 2 methodologies to do it.
It's
You can
current
do it
price.
this way,
It's,
or you could do it this way.
it's just
I do it this way because I
Current
can do
price
it in my
divided
head.
by
I can
price.
calculate the percentage change in my head.
that's what I'm
Because
saying.
this is easier, right?
Yeah, I just.
This is 130. What is this? If this is 130, what's this?
It's just
1.3. I don't have to subtract out the 1 and multiply, I know it's 30%. So I know it quickly.
Wait.
That's the way you wanna do it. Okay? Unless prices are falling, then you might have to use the calculator. Alright, so let's continue to say this.
Yeah, and then it's the minus
Alright, you guys ready? Make sure I have the videotape, but I'll make sure I get you the videotapes.
Do you have an extra clipboard, Professor?
Is it chocolate time or is it clipboard time?
Yeah, we're hanging out the
Chocolate.
chocolate.
What time is it?
Okay, wait.
Hours in chocolate?
So, for first, first.
Yeah, bro, rest in
And then we have 1.10,
You guys ready?
no, minus 1. And multiplied by 4.
I'm setting a solid foundation here, and then we'll go do some
If you want
things.
price, if you want percentage.
You guys ready?
And what is this? What is this one again? 1 divided by 1?
Let's say it's one unit of time.
So there's 2 equilibrium points, one here and one here. I see E1, E2. Okay. At these equilibrium points, these are the structural occupancy rates. Okay, we went through structural occupancy rates and vacancy rates last time. What's the structural occupancy rates for commercial? When I'm analyzing commercial markets, what's the structural occupancy rate that I'm using? Does anybody remember?
Is it one vacant rate equals 1 occupancy rate?
No, there were structural. It's like the vacancy rate minus 1 is gonna give you the occupancy rate. The occupancy rate minus 1 gives you the vacancy.
Oh yeah, that's what I wrote
But
down.
they're markets, commercial markets and residential markets, apartment markets have structural vacancy rates. Do you remember what the structural occupancy rate? You could use vacancy, but I'm using occupancy. But if you know the occupancy rate, you know the vacancy rate.
Thank you.
No. Okay, you guys need to memorize this. So the structural occupancy rate for commercial is 10%. Or no, sorry, 90%.
Oh, so numbers right here.
And then 10%.
And then the structural vacancy rate is
10%.
what?
10.
10%, yeah. So structural occupancy rate for commercial is 90. Structural occupancy rates for apartments,
I literally had it right here.
structural occupancy rates for apartments is 95%, okay? So if I go into a marketplace and the structural occupancy rate for apartments is 97%. Is it above the structural?
Yeah.
Yeah, and what's happening to rents? They're going up significantly. Yeah, exactly. And the same thing with vacancy rates. If vacancy rates are, if the structural vacancy rate should be 5%, but the vacancy rates are 3, what is that telling you about rent growth? It's gonna continue to go up. Because vacancy rates are below the structural in the market, okay? So this is 90% for commercial, okay? And then we'll just leave it at that. So what happens is here, there's no lending,
Oh, yeah. Cheers, one.
there's no demand, there's no new construction. There's no rental growth rate. There's no price appreciation.
You're dumb.
No job growth. Basically, here, the market is stagnant. No construction, no lending, no demand, no net absorption. Basically, the market is just sitting there, waiting
For the bonds.
for the recovery, waiting for job. Okay. And then all of a sudden, the Fed starts lowering interest rates, stimulating the economy, increases industrial production, GDP. People have to start hiring. They start hiring people. When they hire people, they need more space. It increases absorption of the space as they start to lease more. Occupancy rates go up, and rental rates start to go up.
So to lower the interest rate, do the feds do it indirectly by buying the bonds?
They do it directly by buying the bonds
Oh, okay, so that's like the,
through open market operations,
Alright.
which is the main monetary policy tool
okay,
to cool or stimulate the economy, either cool it or stimulate it. You want to cool it because inflation and asset price bubbles are getting too high. They will start to sell bonds, drive bond prices down and interest rates up.
so that's like the checks and balances that it's designed to do?
Yeah, the Fed, Federal Reserve is an independent agency, is independent from the government. So to conduct monetary policy based on their mandate to create employment, exports, they have like multiple mandates. And if they see that the economy's in a recession, they'll start printing money, buying a ton of bonds, driving up bond prices and driving interest rates down to stimulate the economy through low cost of capital. Okay? And if they see that the economy's overheating, they'll sell the bonds, bond prices will go down, interest rates will go up, increase the cost of capital, and they'll start cooling the economy. Okay? And that's all they do. The Congress and the president can lower taxes to stimulate the economy, but that takes time to debate it, right? But once they cut the taxes, then it stimulates the economy instantaneously. Monetary policy, when you lower interest rates, there's a lag. Okay? You should have got that all in your background, of course, but I'm going to go through all that stuff over again. So then the economy starts to pick up, production, job growth, employment, absorption, and occupancy rates start to go up, and rents start to rise. Then the occupancy rates hit the first equilibrium point. There's still in this phase, there's no new construction. You got rising rents, occupancy rates, valuations start to move up, but no new construction in this piece right here. Okay. And at equilibrium, the rents are growing at the local inflation rate. So, test question: what's the local inflation rate in Iowa City, Iowa. What do you think it is? What?
It'd be pretty low.
Yeah, maybe like 2% or something. What do you think the local inflation rate is in the Bay Area?
Very
What?
Very high.
What?
5%.
Yeah, like 5%. Okay. So then, here's the key. Since there's no new construction and occupancy rates have now starting to move above the structural, you get this right here. And I just put this little box right there. Mueller didn't put this in his example, so I had to modify his a little bit. This is the rent spike zone. Rent spikes. This is the rent, no new construction, maybe just a little. Occupancy rates are above the structural and rents are starting to spike. A rent spike would be roughly between like 15% and 25%. Because there's no new supply. So rents start to spike and values start to spike too. Okay. All right, then you reach this point right here, right at the end of the rent spike zone. That's called the cost feasibility point. That's the point in which it is now feasible to start new construction. Okay, so basically, when,
Okay.
yeah. So this is my cost of construction.
Rent's increasing.
Yeah, let's say it's $100, right, a square foot. But now valuations or sales prices go to $120 a square foot. So what's your delta? 20 bucks. Okay. So once you have this delta that's large enough, the developers will start to rush in to try to capture that arbitrage profit, because they're incentivized by money, right, at the end of the day. Okay. So then what happens is new supply starts to come into the marketplace because of the incentive here. As new supply hits the market, it's going to start pushing down occupancy rates. And usually by this time it's like 7-8 years later, particularly in markets like this. So as new supply starts to come online, it pushes down the occupancy rate. So you have occupancy rates start to fall. Net absorption starts to fall. Rental growth rates starts to slow. They're not falling yet. So it's really a supply factor. Supply is now starting to come in and start pushing down the occupancy rates, pushing down price appreciation rates, pushing down rental growth rates, pushing down net absorption. But usually by this time, not only is there supply coming in, but the economy is starting to fall into the decline phase. So demand is starting to fall. But since the occupancy rates are still above the second equilibrium point, and because rents are growing still well above the local inflation rate, lenders continue to lend. People continue to invest in new construction. So the financing cycle continues until it's too late, until you've already fallen past this point. You've fallen into a recession. There's excess supply. You have negative net absorption. Rents and prices are falling. the lenders are starting to shut down their lending. And it's just a bloodbath in most cases during this phase right here. It's extremely painful.
Is it gonna be worse because of the election, you think? Like the
I think
the slingshot?
I think the prices will correct because as the Fed starts to pull back, the liquidity, the markets will convulse. It will go into a recession. It'll be more asset price bubble bursting correction in the prices as opposed to potentially, underlying demand factors. I think the underlying foundations of the economy are pretty solid. But just the Federal Reserve has inflated real estate prices and stock prices to a point where there's gonna be a correction. The other is it's not gonna be, if you go back historically in these other cycles, up until right around 93, the other recessions, the early 90s recessions are the ones pretty much after this, were not, the real estate cycles were not oversupply driven. They were driven mainly by deficient demand. The prior cycles were mostly supply driven. So the bottoms in the real estate cycle were exacerbated because there was too much building. The overbuilding aspect of the real estate cycle does not occur anymore. Okay, because the banks are more strict in their capital. So it's really demand side capital markets as opposed to supply side. That really hits the real estate markets these days, which means that the real estate markets are more in balance now than ever before. There's more discipline than there has been in the past. Okay. The last one is the financing cycle. Okay, so this is mortgage flows, capital flows, and mortgage flows drives pricing for real estate. So this is how the mortgage flows look. So there really is no mortgage flows here. And then the mortgage flows from the banking industry, from the debt markets, real estate debt markets and real estate equity markets start to ramp up here. Okay. And then what they do is they overshoot like this. And then taper out. So the capital flows, because the rents are still growing above the local inflation rate, you're still getting price appreciation rates. Structural occupancy rates are still above equilibrium. The banks continue to lend until it's too late. Then they pull back because they start to see that we're falling into a recession and the markets are oversupplied. Okay, so that's a little bit more detail on Mueller's model. But yeah.
When Obama shut down the government,
Yes.
was that due to something like inflation-wise? Or?
No, the shutdown of the government was that the politics between the two parties and who controlled both the House and the Senate and the executive branch. They couldn't come to a negotiation on raising the debt ceiling. So what they did was they shut down the government until the Congress came to a negotiation to lift the debt ceiling to fund the government again. During those periods of shutdown, the political parties are basically negotiating policy, right? And a lot of those budget deals also include other social and military appropriations that otherwise in most cases should not be in the budget negotiations. They should be separate appropriation bills. So it's a chicken and a prisoner's dilemma, a winner take all scenario. But when they did have the first big government shutdown in 2000, I think it was like 2011, 2012, it created a mild recession in the United States because the government and everything was shut down for almost 60 days. And that's a lot of economic activity and a lot of money that's not flowing through the economy. Government is one of the components of gross domestic product. Government appropriations and spending drives GDP. If you take that to zero, then GDP, collapses, or at least slows significantly. Okay, does everybody understand the cycle analysis? Any questions on that?
The blue line, blue box.
Those are mortgage flows. These are both public, private, debt, equity, and mortgage finance flows. Okay? Because those capital flows drives investment in real estate, drives prices of real estate, and drives eventually construction of real estate.
Why is it lagged behind?
Because the
I thought as.
The underwriters want to make sure that the recovery is in place before they start lending because they're very risk averse. And they need to see that the prices are significantly higher than the cost of construction before they start lending. And then what they do is, since they see that prices and rents are continuing to go up because occupancy rates are still above the structural, they're not really looking at the trajectory or the trend, they're just looking at the level. Yeah.
So that's why,
And then they end up
Overlending.
overlending.
and that's why once they realize that, they drop so fast.
Yeah, then they just shut it off. Because they're not gonna continue to lend when rents and prices are falling.
So to start a family in that, or to buy a house in that way would be difficult.
You wanna buy the house here,
Yeah.
or here, right? Right before, right before the home prices spike, or the rents start to spike. And then you probably wanna get out somewhere around in here, right? Or you just hold on, because these cycles, even though they go through cycles, they look more like this. They look more like that. Yeah. You have basically price drift due to monetary inflation. Because the Federal Reserve tries to target inflation, because the capitalistic system, the lending system, the debt financing system that is the United States is based on inflation. You have to have inflation. Okay. If you have deflation or disinflation, you're like Europe. Okay, where monetary policy doesn't work or doesn't work as well, and they've resorted to negative interest rates, which is completely unorthodox. We've never gone to that extreme. They've gone to the extreme of using overly accommodative, unorthodox monetary policy to drive interest rates negative, to drive the cost of capital negative, to try to induce people to spend and try to induce banks to lend, but the policy hasn't worked. So it's not a good policy, because it didn't work. So we'll see. It's never happened before in history.
Prior to them.
Prior to the Europeans and the Japanese and other countries implementing negative interest rate policy in their monetary policy, it had never been done before in modern Federal Reserve or central bank history. So it's unproven theory. It's unproven, and we don't know what the consequences are going to be at the end. I kind of know what the consequences are going to be at the end. It's not going to be pretty, because most of that money that was printed to drive interest rates negative was fiscal debt. It was the government. When the central bank prints money to fund budget deficits by governments, to invest and pick winners and losers in the economy, you have misappropriation and misallocation of resources. It distorts the efficiency.
Everyone else's money.
There is like $60 trillion on central bank balance sheets right now. It had never been like that before. I mean, there was probably like $1 trillion 20 years ago. Now there's 60. It's unfathomable. And then you have government debt. Ours is like 22 trillion in debt outstanding, with $1 trillion of, deficit financing we got to come up with every year now going forward. Other countries are in the same boat. So they have huge amounts of government debt on the central bank's balance sheets, and they've levered up the public balance sheet with really no way to unwind it in the future if there was another financial crisis or massive sovereign bond defaults at some point in the future, which is probably what's gonna happen. And what's gonna happen to the price of real estate when that happens? When there's no financing, no stimulus, gonna go down? Yeah, exactly. Yep. How am I doing on time? I'm deviating a little bit. 15? Interesting. What we're gonna do next week is the supply demand analysis. I'm gonna walk you through the next part of it. We're gonna do the memos, okay? I would start doing the research on memos, start collecting the research, do more of those articles. You guys already have your chapters, okay? I'll post the PowerPoints up there, and then the first team that's ready to go, when you're ready, you tell me, and I'll throw you up there. And we'll do it, 10 minutes. Right? 8 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe a little Q&A. The attention span of most individuals. The best presentations when you're doing a pitch is probably like 5 to 7 minutes. 10 minutes is a little bit too long, but it's good enough for this class. 12 is probably good, but if you're doing 15 minutes or 20, you didn't study, and you're just reading from the slides. Just get to the point. Don't have a lot of bullet points. Just edit that stuff and just talk from the slides. Don't read from the slides. Yes, sir.
So, on these chapters, we're going to be talking about, like, not necessarily a whole chapter summary of that little section, but we're bringing in more outside sources.
If you want to, you can do that, or you just edit it down and just get to the most important stuff, or the stuff that you can talk about.
We're essentially presenting the chapters.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm getting you to write, present, reports, memos, analysis, that kind of stuff, and then we'll do is I'll test you, on this stuff, the supply demand analysis, occupancies, vacancies, just some basic stuff, and then in the back of the pretest I ask you if you're forecasting occupancy rates or rental rates or prices, what would be the variables in the model that you would use to build the forecast model.
And so we are keeping those books then to read the chapters, the ones that.
Yeah, you can borrow the books if you want to. They're on reserve at the library, so you don't have to buy them. And then I'll post all the PowerPoints and stuff so that you have them available. So you don't have to create the PowerPoints yourself. You have something to work with, and you can edit it down.
Oh, cool.
I tried to check out the economics and the analytics book in the library. They said that they
Oh, you
don't
can't?
have it.
Oh, I'll lend it to you.
Okay.
Oh, they don't have it?
I don't know, that's what they said.
Really? Because I went by to give it to them, and they said they got it.
Well, that's what I thought. I was like, oh, it
Yeah.
should be on reserve. And they're like, oh, they don't have it. So I don't know. Maybe
Well,
it was
I
just
went
the
there.
person working or.
No, I went there to give them my books, and they go, no, we got them on reserve.
I think I need to.
But you guys can borrow them or take pictures of the chapters. Take pictures, and then I'll post the PowerPoints.
Do next week.
If you want to do a chapter, cool. Do one of those articles.
Do we present on both of them at the same time? Or is it just one at a time?
Just do one at a time for the articles. Just keep working on that, work on your pre-test, and then we'll get to that. Okay. And then,
I was like, why?
And then we'll get to the memos next class, you said?
yeah, I'll go through the supply and demand analysis, and I'll do the memos next year. But definitely have the, have these, the national report and the local report.
Was that what we're supposed to be on last class, right? So if I already have it, then I'm good?
But I'm saying you should print all that stuff out now, so that you have it.
Okay.
And then I'll walk you through the
We
economics.
did the SF, and then we did the,
Yeah, do SF office, national office.
and I did like quarter 3 for 2019, I don't know.
Yeah, so they gave
And
us
then
the
for
test,
industrial, I would do either Oakland or San Jose
and then
for industrial.
Oh, industrial. I thought we were supposed to do, the entire US.
You do the US, you look at the US, but then you can use some data from the local market in the memo.
Okay.
Yeah, we're forecasting at the national level, but we can talk about the local market.
As well, okay.
Yeah, that's why I want you to know both reports. And then for retail, I would do national in San Francisco or New York. You don't have to do the Bay Area, you can do other markets. For apartments, you could do New York or San Francisco or LA. LA would be a good one for apartments because it's such a huge market.
Yeah.
And then you pick the fifth
Yeah, the new
property
new
sector.
IOS is
And,
just
Storage.
and then bring in reports for each one of those.
Yeah, bring them. Yeah, bring
That's
them.
it, just bring the report and go.
Yeah, bring the reports, take it, read the memo,
yeah.
and then I'll walk you through the memo,
Yeah.
I'll walk you through the economics, so that you can give me a draft of the memo, like in a week.
Okay, and you're gonna show us how to make those first.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and I don't mind you guys working together on the memos, but you can't just work on them and then swap the names out and have the two of the exact same memos. I need to have the data different, some things different. So you can work on them together, but don't just swap out the names, because it gets boring when I'm reading the exact same,
Yeah.
memo.
So like I could bring in like Ed, New York, and he'll bring in like SF.
Totally, yeah,
And then
Yeah.
we can work on that together. And
Yeah.
so if I bring those in next week, you're gonna help us do those next week, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah. I'll do the supply demand analysis, I'll do the
As
memos.
much as I never used
We'll go around, do the articles again.
Okay.
I'll work on the pre-test. So I'm kind of setting up the foundation.
Gotcha.
And then we'll start working through the quiz,
Okay.
doing that stuff. And then I'll start bringing in maybe some Excel, do some investment analysis, start bringing in some financial economics.
And then one more, and then you're gonna bring in more of the sheets so we can kind of analyze more reports,
Yeah,
the front page reports.
yeah, I apologize for not bringing extras of those.
And then movie reviews as well, right?
Yeah, I got extras of those if you want to do
I can't
that.
even more.
I would do the inside job first, and then the big short, and then pick a movie of your choice for the third one. Okay? All right, I think I'm done. Yes.
Are we interested?
I want you to keep them.
All of them?
Keep them for right now, and then what I'll do is, when the deliverables done, if you want me to look at them, I'll look at them, but I assume you did a good job.
I hope
You know if you did a good job.
I think so.
Okay. And then what I'll do is when the deliverables due, you'll hand those in.
All of them.
Yeah, and then I'll review everything.
Okay.
But you should start thinking about your
It's really
pages.
just printing it. It's just finding the area you want to
Yes.
do it in. Because we need to do it. There's like 5 sectors
Yeah.
that you print reports for it.
No, that was just to give you an idea of what the methodology you should be approaching, to do this. Now you can go find something else
So I
that,
think I already.
and I'll work with you on formulating the
How do we
research.
combine all of
Office.
them if
Too much to think about.
I've only done office.
like, so I did mine.
Yeah, but the paper
But
should
I've
be in
done
the same subject.
Office.
Oh, okay, so we're just gonna.
Yeah, this one's just a test
And then I did.
to kind of get you,
So I don't know if we should.
know how to do the analysis, how to read it.
Yeah, these are on
Put the
pages, so
content in
like.
the worksheet.
On the
And then
journals
now,
that you look
if
up,
you're
you'll be able
comfortable,
to
you
see
can
the
pick
small.
a
Top
topic,
right here.
and then start doing the,
Yeah,
so
it's
that
like
what
on
you're
YouTube.
doing after this,
Really on the.
pretty close after this, you're gonna say, I wanna
Oh,
do,
it's right there.
what
He's gonna
drives
show us
office
how to, like, put
values
it in
in high-tech cluster cities? What are the factors that drive, office values and office rates? And you start getting into some economic analysis,
And I was like,
economic
I'm like,
base,
wow, he really thinks me about it.
tech companies to cluster in certain geographies. And there's a lot of robust, brokerage research and academic
Wait,
research.
can you see my card?
Will you have us also present future,
I think you did perfect.
Yeah?
research?
Yeah, we'll do the articles in a formal way right now.
I know.
Then I'll ask you to put together
I was so miserable.
a
He's like,
PowerPoint.
Wait.
work something out. I was like,
Here?
I said it was come
Do
off.
your presentation. And then
I didn't say
we'll do a
anything, it was
synthesized
so miserable.
presentation at the end of the semester. Kind of
So
just
glad I-
seeing the consistency across the different
I know,
articles.
I'm like,
And then
Gotta-
synthesize
the
it
project
into
tomorrow.
a brief presentation. of the
I'm not sleeping. Please spend the night in the living room.
Is it
So am I in the class yet?
Yeah, you have to sign this thing.
Oh, okay.
Put your name and all that
I
stuff.
put my name right here, my ID.
Yeah, yeah.
Did that. But as far as Mole goes, do I have to talk to Sydney? Am I A-okay?
Yeah, you gotta go talk to those guys to make sure you're registered and stuff.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Thank you.